The alarm klaxons aboard the Kralthek slave transport ship began wailing at Aero 347 ship time, jolting Zara from her restless sleep. The massive vessel shuddered as something impacted against its hull, causing several prisoners to cry out in fear. Through the reinforced viewport of the cargo hold, Zara could see flashes of weapons fire lighting up the darkness of space like deadly fireworks. Commander Gorth's voice boomed over the ship's communication system, his reptilian accent making his words sound even more threatening. He barked orders in the harsh Kraltek language, while emergency lights bathed everything in an ominous red glow. The other prisoners pressed themselves against the walls of their cells, not understanding what was happening, but sensing that their already terrible situation had somehow become worse. Captain Marcus. Chen guided his ship Aurora's Dawn through a complex series of evasive maneuvers as Kralthek plasma bolts streaked past his viewports. The human vessel was much smaller than the transport ship, built for speed and stealth rather than heavy combat. Marcus knew he couldn't win in a straight fight, but he didn't need to win. He just needed to create enough chaos to accomplish his mission. Sarah, how are those shield modifications coming along? Marcus called to his chief engineer over the sound of stressed metal and sparking electronics. Sarah Rodriguez, a former Earth Defense Force mechanic, was elbow-deep in the ship's power distribution system. Give me 30 seconds, Captain. I'm rerouting power from life support to boost our defensive capabilities. We'll have about 10 minutes before the air gets too thin to breathe. The third member of their crew, Kai Nakamura, was hunched over the tactical console with the intensity of a surgeon performing brain surgery. The young Japanese hacker had spent years breaking into corporate databases before joining Marcus's crew, and his skills with electronic warfare were legendary among the independent. Smugglers and rebels who operated in the Outer Rim territories. I'm detecting approximately 400 life signs aboard that transport, Kai reported, his fingers dancing across the holographic interface. Most of them are concentrated in what appears to be a cargo hold. Definitely prisoners, Captain. Marcus gritted his teeth as another plasma bolt passed dangerously close to his ship. 400 innocent lives trapped aboard that vessel, bound for the slave markets of Gorthak Prime. The thought made his blood boil with a very human emotion that the Kralthek Empire had never quite learned to understand or predict. Righteous anger. The humans had only made contact with the broader galactic community 50 years ago, and in that time, they had earned a reputation as troublemakers and meddlers. Most alien species followed strict hierarchies and codes of conduct that had been established over millennia. They understood concepts like territorial boundaries, tribute payments, and the natural order of strong species dominating weaker ones. But humans seemed to operate according to completely different rules. They had this bizarre notion that all sentient beings possessed something they called inherent dignity and natural rights that couldn't be violated regardless of military or technological superiority. It was a concept so alien to most galactic civilizations that they dismissed it as primitive human superstition. Marcus had been a cargo pilot for the Terran colonial authority when he first witnessed a Kralthek slave raid on a defenseless mining colony. The Empire's forces had overwhelmed the settlement's minimal defenses and begun loading civilian workers onto transport ships for sale in distant markets. When Marcus radioed for help from the nearest TCA military base, he was told that the colony was outside of human territory and therefore not their problem. That was the day Marcus Chen stopped following orders and started following his conscience. He stole his transport ship, recruited a crew of like-minded individuals, and began a one-man war against the slave trade that had been growing bolder as it expanded into human-controlled space. "Sarah, I need those shields now," Marcus shouted as the Kralthek ship launched a full spread of torpedoes in his direction. "Shields are up, Captain, but they won't hold for long against that kind of firepower," Sarah replied from her position in the engine room. "We need to end this fast or we're all going to be very dead very soon." Kai's hands moved across his console with practiced precision as he attempted to penetrate the Kralthek ship's computer systems. The Empire's technology was robust and well defended, but it had been designed by a species that thought in rigid, hierarchical patterns. Human hackers like Kai had learned to exploit the gaps in alien logic by thinking in ways that no Kralthek programmer could anticipate. "I'm in their navigation system," Kai announced with satisfaction. "Uploading a virus now that should scramble their targeting computers and give us a window of opportunity." Aboard the slave transport, Zara felt the ship lurch violently as its automated weapon systems began firing wildly in random directions. The prisoners were thrown around their cells like rag dolls, adding to their terror and confusion. Commander Gorth's angry roars could be heard, echoing through the corridors as he tried to regain control of his vessel. The young Larosian woman pressed herself against the viewport and gasped as she saw the attacking ship for the first time. It was sleek and elegant compared to the brutish Kraltek design, with smooth curves and graceful lines that reminded her of the wind riders her people used to build before their world was conquered. Strange symbols were painted on its hull in a script she didn't recognize. "Who are they?" whispered Mira, the green-scaled vegan who shared Zara's cell. "Are they pirates come to steal us for themselves?" Zara shook her head, her empathic abilities picking up something unusual about the emotions radiating from the attacking vessel. Instead of the cold calculation or cruel hunger she associated with slavers and pirates, she sensed something entirely different: determination mixed with compassion, and an anger that burned not with hatred, but with a desire for justice. "I don't think they're slavers," Zara said quietly. "I sense something different about them. Something I've never felt before from any of the species I've encountered." As if responding to her words, the attacking ship moved into a new position that brought it directly between the slave transport and a nearby asteroid field. Instead of continuing their assault, the mysterious vessel opened a communication channel that broadcast on all frequencies in multiple languages. The voice that came through the speakers was unlike anything Zara had ever heard. It was warm and emotional, carrying undertones of determination and hope that seemed to cut through the despair that had filled the cargo hold for so long. "This is Captain Marcus, Chen of the independent vessel Aurora's Dawn," the voice said in accented but understandable galactic standard. "We know you have prisoners aboard your ship. Release them immediately and we'll allow you to leave this system unharmed. You have 60 seconds to respond." Commander Gorth's reply was predictable: a stream of Kraltek profanity, followed by orders to destroy the human ship. But something had changed in the cargo hold. The prisoners were looking at each other with expressions Zara hadn't seen since before their capture. For the first time in months, she saw something that had almost been forgotten: hope. Zara's slender blue fingers traced the cold metal bars of her prison cell aboard the massive slave transport ship. Her crystalline tears fell like tiny diamonds onto the grimy floor, each one carrying the weight of her shattered dreams. The Kraltek Empire had conquered her homeworld of Lyros 3 cycles ago, and now she found herself among hundreds of other alien females destined for the flesh markets of Gorthak Prime. The young Lyrosian woman had once been a respected healer in her village, her natural empathic abilities allowing her to sense pain and illness in others. Her sapphire-colored skin had once glowed with health and happiness, but now it appeared dull and lifeless under the harsh artificial lighting of the cargo hold. Her large violet eyes, once filled with hope and compassion, now reflected only despair and resignation. The slave traders had specifically selected her for the exotic bride program, a cruel practice where wealthy alien nobles purchased female captives from conquered worlds to serve as ornamental wives. Zara knew her fate would be sealed once they reached their destination. She would be cleaned, dressed in revealing garments, and paraded before potential buyers like livestock at market. Around her, dozens of other captive women from various species huddled together for comfort. There was Mira, a green-skinned vegan whose scales had lost their natural shimmer, and Kala, a wolf-like Canarian whose fur had become matted and unkempt. Each had their own tragic story of loss and capture, but none spoke anymore. The fight had been beaten out of them during the long journey through space. The Kraltek guards were massive reptilian creatures with thick armor plating and cruel yellow eyes. They took pleasure in the suffering of their captives, often withholding food and water as punishment for the slightest infractions. Their commander, a particularly vicious specimen named Gorth, enjoyed making examples of prisoners who showed any sign of resistance. Zara remembered the day her world fell. The Kraltek warships had appeared suddenly in their star system, overwhelming the peaceful Lyrosian defense fleet within hours. Her people had never been warriors. They were healers, artists, and philosophers who believed in harmony with nature and peaceful coexistence. Their advanced medical technology and beautiful crystal cities meant nothing against the brutal military might of the Empire. She had been in her healing temple when the bombardment began. The ancient crystal structures that had stood for millennia crumbled under the alien weapons. Zara had tried to help the wounded, using her empathic healing powers to ease their pain, but there were too many casualties and not enough time. When the Kralthek soldiers stormed through the ruins, they had specifically sought out young females of breeding age. The selection process had been humiliating and terrifying. The aliens had used strange devices to scan their bodies and minds, cataloging their physical attributes and mental capacities like merchandise. Zara's healing abilities had made her particularly valuable, as empathic species were rare and highly prized among the galaxy's elite as exotic companions. Now, as the transport ship continued its journey toward the slave markets, Zara felt the last remnants of hope slipping away. She had heard whispers among the guards about their destination. Gorthak Prime was a notorious world where the worst kind of trafficking occurred. The buyers there were known for their cruelty and perverse desires. Many of the women sold there were never seen again. The ship's engines hummed with a monotonous drone that seemed to echo the emptiness in Zara's heart. She closed her eyes and tried to remember better times on Lyros. She thought of the crystal gardens where she had learned her healing arts, the gentle music of the wind chimes that sang in the evening breeze, and the warm embrace of her family who were now either dead or scattered across the galaxy as slaves. Her empathic abilities, which had once been a blessing, now felt like a curse. She could feel the despair and terror of every woman in the cargo hold, their emotions washing over her in waves of anguish. The pain was almost unbearable, but she had learned to build mental walls to protect herself from being completely overwhelmed. The guards made their evening rounds, their heavy footsteps echoing through the metal corridors. They carried shock prods that they used liberally on anyone who didn't move fast enough or showed any sign of defiance. Zara had learned to keep her head down and avoid eye contact. Resistance only brought more suffering, not just for herself, but for the other prisoners as well. As she lay on the thin sleeping mat that served as her bed, Zara wondered if death might be preferable to the fate that awaited her. But something deep inside her refused to give up completely. Perhaps it was the healer in her, the part that had always fought to preserve life and ease suffering. Or maybe it was simply the stubborn will to survive that existed in all living beings. She didn't know that somewhere in the vast darkness of space, a small human vessel was tracking their ship's energy signature. The humans were relative newcomers to the galactic community, but they had already gained a reputation for their fierce independence and their inexplicable tendency to interfere in situations that didn't concern them. Captain Marcus. Chen of the independent freighter Aurora's Dawn had been following reports of Kralthek slave ships for weeks. His crew of misfits and former military personnel had made it their mission to disrupt the Empire's trafficking operations wherever possible. They were outnumbered and outgunned, but they possessed something that the Kralthek couldn't understand or counter: human unpredictability and an absolute refusal to accept injustice. As Zara drifted into an uneasy sleep, she couldn't have imagined that her world was about to change forever. The humans were coming, and with them would come hope, chaos, and the possibility of freedom she had thought was lost forever. Captain Marcus Chen's 60-second deadline expired without a response from the Kralthek commander, unless profanity and threats counted as diplomatic communication. Marcus had expected nothing less from the reptilian slavers, but he had needed to give them the opportunity to surrender. His conscience demanded it, even though his tactical mind knew they would never accept. "Kai, are you ready to execute Phase 2 of our plan?" Marcus asked, his hand steady on the ship's controls despite the plasma bolts that continued to streak past his viewports. The young hacker's eyes never left his console as his fingers worked to maintain their infiltration of the Kralthek ship's systems. "Ready, Captain. I've identified their shield generator locations and mapped their internal security protocols. Once I shut down their defenses, we'll have maybe 10 minutes before their backup systems come online." Sarah's voice crackled through the intercom from the engine room. "Captain, I've got the boarding pods prepped and ready. The magnetic clamps are charged, and I've loaded the pods with everything we might need for a rescue operation." Marcus took a deep breath and felt the familiar weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. Every rescue mission was a calculated risk, and the odds were always stacked against them. The Aurora's Dawn carried a crew of only 3 against a Kralthek transport with at least 50 armed guards. But the humans had advantages that couldn't be measured in terms of firepower or numbers. Aboard the slave transport, Zara watched in amazement as the human ship began executing maneuvers that defied everything she thought she knew about space combat. Instead of the rigid formation flying that characterized most military encounters, The Aurora's dawn moved like a living thing, flowing around the Kraltek ship's weapons fire with an intuitive grace that seemed almost impossible. The Kraltek were excellent engineers and capable warriors, but they approached combat the same way they approached everything else, with methodical precision and overwhelming force. They had studied human military tactics since first contact and believed they understood their enemy's capabilities. What they hadn't counted on was the human capacity for creative improvisation. "Beginning boarding sequence now," Marcus announced to his crew as he brought the Aurora's dawn alongside the massive transport ship. The Kraltek vessel was easily 10 times larger than his own ship, its hull bristling with weapons and armor plating that could withstand most conventional attacks. Kai's virus chose that moment to activate, sending the transport's defensive systems into chaos. Shield generators shut down randomly, weapons fired at empty space, and internal security doors began opening and closing without authorization. Commander Gorth's roars of frustration could be heard throughout the ship as his crew struggled to regain control. "Now, Sarah," Marcus called out as he maneuvered his ship to match the transport's rotation. 3 boarding pods launched from the Aurora's dawn's ventral bay, their magnetic clamps seeking out optimal attachment points on the Kraltek hull. Each pod was a marvel of human engineering, small, fast, and designed to cut through ship armor using plasma torches that could breach even military-grade plating in under 2 minutes. Zara felt the vibrations through the deck plating as the boarding pods attached themselves to the transport's hull. The other prisoners looked around in confusion and growing excitement as they heard the sound of cutting torches beginning their work. None of them had ever seen or heard of anyone attempting to rescue slaves from a Kraltek transport ship. The young Lyrosian woman pressed her face against the viewport and tried to catch a glimpse of their potential rescuers. Her empathic abilities were picking up emotional signatures, unlike anything she had encountered before. The beings aboard the attacking ship radiated a complex mixture of determination, compassion, and something else she couldn't quite identify, a fierce joy in the act of defying impossible odds. Commander Gorth stormed through the corridors of his ship, his plasma rifle at the ready and his yellow eyes blazing with fury. The Kraltek commander had never encountered humans in combat before, but he had heard stories from other ship captains. They were supposed to be weak, emotional creatures who avoided direct confrontation whenever possible. "Squad leaders, report!" He snarled into his communicator as his warriors took positions throughout the ship. "Sir, we have detected 3 breach points in sections 7, 12, and 18, came the reply from his chief security officer. The intruders are using some kind of advanced plasma cutting technology. Estimated time to hull breach is 90 seconds. Gorth's clawed hands tightened on his weapon. 3 simultaneous boarding actions meant these humans were either very brave or very stupid. Either way, they would learn what happened to those who dared to interfere with Kraltek Empire business. Marcus. Chen emerged from the first boarding pod wearing a lightweight combat suit that provided protection against both weapons fire and the vacuum of space. Unlike the heavy armor favored by most military forces, human combat gear prioritized mobility and flexibility over sheer defensive capability. The philosophy reflected a fundamental difference in how humans approached warfare. The captain moved through the breach in the transport's hull with the fluid grace of a dancer, his weapon already tracking for targets as he assessed the tactical situation. Behind him came 2 combat drones, each one controlled by Kai from back aboard the Aurora's dawn. The drones were another example of human innovation. Small, fast, and equipped with non-lethal weapons designed to incapacitate rather than kill. "Kai, I need a route to the main cargo hold," Marcus sub-vocalized into his throat microphone as he advanced down the corridor. "And keep those security doors cycling. I want the Kraltek confused about where we are and where we're going." Back on the Aurora's dawn, Kai's fingers danced across multiple holographic displays as he coordinated the rescue operation from his position at the tactical console. His virus had given him limited access to the transport's internal systems, allowing him to map the ship's layout and track the movement of both prisoners and guards. "You've got about 40 Kraltek troops converging on your position, Captain," Kai reported. "I'm reading prisoner life signs 3 decks below you and 200 meters aft. I can guide you through maintenance shafts and service corridors to avoid the main force of guards." Sarah Rodriguez had emerged from the second boarding pod at the opposite end of the ship. Her mission focused on disabling the transport's engines and preventing it from jumping to hyperspace. The former Earth Defense Force mechanic moved through the alien vessel with the confidence of someone who understood machinery better than most people understood themselves. Engine room secured, Sarah reported as she began placing explosive charges on critical components. These Krauthek ships are built tough, but they've got the same weaknesses as any fusion-powered vessel. Give me 5 minutes and this bucket won't be going anywhere. The third boarding pod had been empty, a deception designed to divide the Krauthek forces and create confusion about the human team's actual strength and objectives. Marcus had learned long ago that misdirection was often more valuable than firepower when facing superior numbers. As alarms continued to wail throughout the transport, Zara found herself holding her breath as she listened to the sounds of combat echoing through the ship's corridors. The rescue attempt was actually happening. Someone cared enough about their fate to risk everything in an attempt to free them from slavery. For the first time since her capture, the young Larosian woman allowed herself to hope that freedom might be possible. She didn't know who these mysterious rescuers were or what motivated them to risk their lives for strangers, but she could feel their determination like a beacon cutting through the darkness that had surrounded her for so long. The sound of approaching footsteps made her look up just as a figure in sleek combat armor appeared at the end of the corridor. The being moved with a fluid grace that reminded her of the wind dancers from her homeworld, and when it spoke, the voice that emerged was the same warm, determined tone she had heard over the communication system. "Don't worry," Marcus Chen said as he began working on the electronic locks of the prison cells. "We're going to get you out of here. All of you." Zara's violet eyes widened in amazement as the electronic locks on her cell door sparked and then clicked open with a soft mechanical whir. She had expected their rescuer to be another familiar alien species, but the being standing before her was unlike anything she had ever encountered. The creature was tall and lean, with pale skin visible through the transparent faceplate of its combat helmet, and eyes that held an intensity she couldn't quite comprehend. "Can you walk?" Marcus Chen asked as he moved efficiently from cell to cell, his portable hacking device making quick work of the Krauthek security systems. "We don't have much time before their reinforcements arrive." The young Lyrosian woman nodded, not trusting her voice as she stepped out of the cage that had confined her for so many terrible weeks. Around her, other prisoners were emerging from their own cells with expressions of disbelief and growing hope. Mira, the green-scaled vegan, was openly weeping with relief, while Kala, the wolf-like Canarian, kept looking around as if expecting this to be some cruel dream. Marcus's enhanced vision picked up the emotional state of the freed prisoners through his suit's biometric scanners. Most were suffering from malnutrition, psychological trauma, and various stages of despair. Getting them to safety would require careful handling and probably medical attention that his small ship wasn't equipped to provide. "Listen to me carefully," Marcus said, his voice carrying the natural authority of someone accustomed to command. "I know you've all been through hell, and I know you have no reason to trust anyone right now. But if you want to live through the next hour, you need to follow my instructions exactly. Can you do that?" The prisoners nodded in unison, their various species and cultures united by their shared desire for freedom. Zara found herself drawn to the strange being's emotional signature. Through her empathic abilities, she could sense layers of determination, compassion, and something she had never encountered before. An absolute refusal to accept injustice. "Regardless of personal cost, what species are you?" she asked quietly as Marcus led the group toward what his tactical display showed as the safest route to the extraction point. "We're called humans," Marcus replied, checking his weapon as the sound of approaching Krauthek troops echoed through the corridors. "And we don't believe in slavery." The simple statement carried such conviction that Zara felt it resonate through her empathic senses like a bell. This human wasn't rescuing them for profit or political advantage. He was risking his life simply because he believed it was the right thing to do. The concept was so alien to her experience with galactic civilization that it took her a moment to process. Commander Gorth appeared at the far end of the corridor with a squad of heavily armed Krauthek warriors, their reptilian features twisted with rage and determination. The massive aliens raised their plasma rifles and opened fire without warning or negotiation, their energy bolts scorching the metal walls where the prisoners had been standing moments before. But Marcus had anticipated the attack, his human reflexes and tactical training allowing him to guide the group around a corner just before the weapons fired. The former cargo pilot had learned to read alien body language and combat patterns during his years of rescuing slaves, and Krauthek troops were predictable in their aggressive directness. "Stay low and keep moving," Marcus instructed as he returned fire with his own weapon, a compact energy rifle designed for precision rather than overwhelming force. His shots were carefully aimed to disable rather than kill, targeting weapon systems and armor joints with surgical accuracy. Kai's voice crackled through Marcus's earpiece as the hacker continued to monitor the situation from aboard the Aurora's Dawn. "Captain, I count 26 Krauthek troops between your position and the extraction point. Sarah has the engines disabled, but she's pinned down in the engineering section by enemy fire." Marcus processed this information while simultaneously providing covering fire for the escaped prisoners. The rescue operation was becoming more complex by the minute, but that was nothing new. Every mission seemed to develop complications that couldn't be predicted or planned for in advance. "Can you get Sarah some support?" Marcus asked as he guided the group through a maintenance shaft that would bypass the main corridor where the Krauthek were setting up defensive positions. "Already on it," Kai replied with satisfaction. "I'm taking control of their automated cleaning drones and sending them after the guards in engineering. They're not armed, but they should provide enough distraction for Sarah to reach the extraction point." Zara marveled at the casual way the humans coordinated their efforts across multiple locations while under intense enemy fire. Every alien military force she had observed operated according to strict hierarchies and predetermined battle plans, but these rescuers seemed to improvise and adapt with an almost organic fluidity. The maintenance shaft led to a cargo bay that Marcus had identified as the optimal extraction point. The space was large enough for his ship to dock safely, and it had multiple access routes that would allow them to escape if their primary exit was blocked. Sarah was already there when they arrived, having fought her way through the engineering section with the help of Kai's improvised drone army. "How are our passengers doing?" Sarah asked as she began setting up portable shields around the cargo bay entrance. The former military engineer had a practical approach to rescue, operations that focused on getting everyone out alive rather than engaging in unnecessary heroics. Marcus quickly assessed the condition of the freed prisoners. Most were weak from captivity but able to move under their own power. A few, including an elderly Altarian male, would need medical attention once they reached safety. All of them were watching their rescuers with a mixture of awe and disbelief. "Kai, bring us in for pickup," Marcus commanded, as the sound of Krauthek troops approaching echoed through the ship's corridors. "And make sure our departure is as spectacular as possible. I want every slaver in this sector to know what happens when they mess with innocent people." The Aurora's Dawn appeared in the cargo bay's entrance like a metallic angel of salvation, its sleek hull gleaming under the harsh artificial lighting. The ship's airlock opened to reveal a clean, well-maintained interior that stood in stark contrast to the grimy prison transport they were leaving behind. As the prisoners filed aboard the human vessel, Zara paused to look back at Marcus Chen. The human was still providing covering fire, ensuring that everyone else made it to safety before considering his own escape. The selflessness of the act struck her as profoundly alien yet deeply moving. "Why?" she asked when Marcus finally boarded the ship and sealed the airlock behind him. "Why risk everything for strangers you've never met?" Marcus removed his helmet, revealing a face marked by years of hard decisions and dangerous missions. His dark eyes met Zara's violet ones with an intensity that made her empathic abilities resonate with emotions she didn't fully understand. "Because that's what humans do," he said simply. "We don't leave people in chains if we can help it. It's just who we are." As the Aurora's Dawn pulled away from the disabled slave transport, Zara realized that her world had indeed been altered forever. She had encountered a species that operated according to principles she had thought were impossible in the harsh reality of galactic civilization. These humans possessed something that transcended military technology or political power, an unshakable belief in the inherent worth of every sentient being. The young Lerosian woman pressed her face against the viewport and watched the Krauthek ship receding into the distance. For the first time since her capture, she allowed herself to believe that freedom was not just possible, but inevitable. The humans had shown her that there were still those willing to fight against injustice, regardless of the odds or the personal cost. Her tears, which had been tears of despair just hours before, now fell as symbols of hope and gratitude. The human had indeed altered her world, but in ways she was only beginning to understand. Zara's violet eyes widened in amazement as the electronic locks on her cell door sparked and then clicked open with a soft mechanical whir. She had expected their rescuer to be another familiar alien species, but the being standing before her was unlike anything she had ever encountered. The creature was tall and lean, with pale skin visible through the transparent faceplate of its combat helmet, and eyes that held an intensity she couldn't quite comprehend. "Can you walk?" Marcus Chen asked as he moved efficiently from cell to cell, his portable hacking device making quick work of the Kraltech security systems. "We don't have much time before their reinforcements arrive." The young Lyrosian woman nodded, not trusting her voice as she stepped out of the cage that had confined her for so many terrible weeks. Around her, other prisoners were emerging from their own cells with expressions of disbelief and growing hope. Mira, the green-scaled vegan, was openly weeping with relief, while Kala, the wolf-like Canarian, kept looking around as if expecting this to be some cruel dream. Marcus's enhanced vision picked up the emotional state of the freed prisoners through his suit's biometric scanners. Most were suffering from malnutrition, psychological trauma, and various stages of despair. Getting them to safety would require careful handling and probably medical attention that his small ship wasn't equipped to provide. "Listen to me carefully," Marcus said, his voice carrying the natural authority of someone accustomed to command. "I know you've all been through hell, and I know you have no reason to trust anyone right now. But if you want to live through the next hour, you need to follow my instructions exactly." "Can you do that?" The prisoners nodded in unison, their various species and cultures united by their shared desire for freedom. Zara found herself drawn to the strange being's emotional signature. Through her empathic abilities, she could sense layers of determination, compassion, and something she had never encountered before. An absolute refusal to accept injustice. "Regardless of personal cost, what species are you?" she asked quietly as Marcus led the group toward what his tactical display showed as the safest route to the extraction point. "We're called humans," Marcus replied, checking his weapon as the sound of approaching Kraltech troops echoed through the corridors. "And we don't believe in slavery." The simple statement carried such conviction that Zara felt it resonate through her empathic senses like a bell. This human wasn't rescuing them for profit or political advantage. He was risking his life simply because he believed it was the right thing to do. The concept was so alien to her experience with galactic civilization that it took her a moment to process. Commander Gorth appeared at the far end of the corridor with a squad of heavily armed Kraltech warriors, their reptilian features twisted with rage and determination. The massive aliens raised their plasma rifles and opened fire without warning or negotiation, their energy bolts scorching the metal walls where the prisoners had been standing moments before. But Marcus had anticipated the attack, his human reflexes and tactical training allowing him to guide the group around a corner just before the weapons fired. The former cargo pilot had learned to read alien body language and combat patterns during his years of rescuing slaves, and Kraltech troops were predictable in their aggressive directness. "Stay low and keep moving," Marcus instructed as he returned fire with his own weapon, a compact energy rifle designed for precision rather than overwhelming force. His shots were carefully aimed to disable rather than kill, targeting weapon systems and armor joints with surgical accuracy. Kai's voice crackled through Marcus's earpiece as the hacker continued to monitor the situation from aboard the Aurora's Dawn. "Captain, I count 26 Kraltech troops between your position and the extraction point. Sarah has the engines disabled, but she's pinned down in the engineering section by enemy fire." Marcus processed this information while simultaneously providing covering fire for the escaped prisoners. The rescue operation was becoming more complex by the minute, but that was nothing new. Every mission seemed to develop complications that couldn't be predicted or planned for in advance. "Can you get Sarah some support?" Marcus asked as he guided the group through a maintenance shaft that would bypass the main corridor where the Kraltech were setting up defensive positions. "Already on it," Kai replied with satisfaction. "I'm taking control of their automated cleaning drones and sending them after the guards in engineering. They're not armed, but they should provide enough. Distraction for Sarah to reach the extraction point." Zara marveled at the casual way the humans coordinated their efforts across multiple locations while under intense enemy fire. Every alien military force she had observed operated according to strict hierarchies and predetermined battle plans, but these rescuers seemed to improvise and adapt with an almost organic fluidity. The maintenance shaft led to a cargo bay that Marcus had identified as the optimal extraction point. The space was large enough for his ship to dock safely, and it had multiple access routes that would allow them to escape if their primary exit was blocked. Sarah was already there when they arrived, having fought her way through the engineering section with the help of Kai's improvised drone army. "How are our passengers doing?" Sarah asked as she began setting up portable shields around the cargo bay entrance. The former military engineer had a practical approach to rescue, operations that focused on getting everyone out alive rather than engaging in unnecessary heroics. Marcus quickly assessed the condition of the freed prisoners. Most were weak from captivity but able to move under their own power. A few, including an elderly Altarian male, would need medical attention once they reached safety. All of them were watching their rescuers with a mixture of awe and disbelief. "Kai, bring us in for pickup," Marcus commanded, as the sound of Kralthek troops approaching echoed through the ship's corridors. "And make sure our departure is as spectacular as possible. I want every slaver in this sector to know what happens when they mess with innocent people." The Aurora's dawn appeared in the cargo bay's entrance like a metallic angel of salvation, its sleek hull gleaming under the harsh artificial lighting. The ship's airlock opened to reveal a clean, well-maintained interior that stood in stark contrast to the grimy prison transport they were leaving behind. As the prisoners filed aboard the human vessel, Zara paused to look back at Marcus Chen. The human was still providing covering fire, ensuring that everyone else made it to safety before considering his own escape. The selflessness of the act struck her as profoundly alien yet deeply moving. "Why?" she asked when Marcus finally boarded the ship and sealed the airlock behind him. "Why risk everything for strangers you've never met?" Marcus removed his helmet, revealing a face marked by years of hard decisions and dangerous missions. His dark eyes met Zara's violet ones with an intensity that made her empathic abilities resonate with emotions she didn't fully understand. "Because that's what humans do," he said simply. "We don't leave people in chains if we can help it. It's just who we are." As the Aurora's dawn pulled away from the disabled slave transport, Zara realized that her world had indeed been altered forever. She had encountered a species that operated according to principles she had thought were impossible in the harsh reality of galactic civilization. These humans possessed something that transcended military technology or political power, an unshakable belief in the inherent worth of every sentient being. The young Lerosian woman pressed her face against the viewport and watched the Kraltek ship receding into the distance. For the first time since her capture, she allowed herself to believe that freedom was not just possible, but inevitable. The humans had shown her that there were still those willing to fight against injustice, regardless of the odds or the personal cost. Her tears, which had been tears of despair just hours before, now fell as symbols of hope and gratitude. The human had indeed altered her world, but in ways she was only beginning to understand. 6 months after joining the crew of the Aurora's Dawn, Zara had become an integral part of their rescue operations. Her empathic healing abilities, combined with human medical technology, allowed her to treat both the physical and psychological wounds that slavery inflicted on its victims. More importantly, her presence served as living proof to other rescued aliens that freedom was not just possible, but sustainable. The ship's medical bay had been expanded and redesigned to accommodate Zara's unique healing methods. Crystal resonance chambers from her destroyed homeworld were integrated with human bioscanners, creating a hybrid medical system that could treat trauma on multiple levels simultaneously. The combination of human innovation and Lyrosian empathic healing had proven remarkably effective. "We have another situation developing in the Centauri Reach," Kai announced from his position at the communication console. The young hacker had grown more confident over the months, his skills with electronic warfare now enhanced by Zara's ability to sense the emotional states of their targets during infiltration operations. Marcus studied the tactical display that showed a heavily defended Kralthek processing facility on the moon of Tartarus. 3. Intelligence reports indicated that the Empire was preparing to ship over 1,000 captured beings to their primary slave markets, the largest single transport operation they had attempted in this sector. "That's a military installation, not a transport ship," Sarah observed, her engineering expertise allowing her to identify the defensive capabilities from the surveillance data. "They've got orbital defense platforms, atmospheric interceptors, and at least 2 regiments of ground troops." The scale of the operation was far beyond anything the Aurora's Dawn had attempted before. Marcus felt the familiar weight of impossible odds, but also the burning determination that had driven him to steal his first ship and begin this crusade. 1,000 innocent beings were depending on people like him to refuse to accept that some injustices were too large to challenge. "We can't do this alone," Marcus admitted, his tactical mind already working through the logistics of what would essentially be a military assault. "We'll need help." Zara placed her hand gently on Marcus's shoulder, her empathic abilities allowing her to sense the conflict between his desire to help those prisoners and his responsibility to keep his crew safe. "Then we get help," she said simply. The Underground Railroad has grown larger than just one ship and one crew. Over the following weeks, Marcus and his team reached out through their encrypted networks to other human vessels operating in the region. The response surprised even Marcus with its scope and enthusiasm. Captains who had never worked together began coordinating their efforts, sharing intelligence and resources, with a level of cooperation that was unusual even by human standards. The operation that emerged from these planning sessions was ambitious, beyond anything the galaxy had seen from human forces. Instead of the small-scale raids and rescue missions that characterized most Underground Railroad activities, they would be attempting a coordinated assault on a fortified military installation. Captain Elena Vasquez of the cargo hauler Distant Thunder brought news that changed everything. Her contacts in the Vegan resistance had provided information about a simultaneous Kraltech operation targeting civilian populations on 3 different worlds. The Empire was preparing for a major expansion of their slave trade, using the processing facility on Tartarus III as the central hub for their trafficking network. "This isn't just about rescuing 1,000 prisoners," Elena explained during their final planning meeting. "If we can shut down their processing facility, we'll disrupt the entire regional network. It could set their operations back by years." The assembled captains represented the full diversity of human space: former military officers, independent traders, colonial administrators who had seen too much injustice, and refugees from worlds that had fallen to various galactic empires. What united them was their shared belief that slavery was an abomination that had to be fought regardless of personal cost. Zara participated in the planning sessions as the operation's chief medical officer, but her empathic abilities provided insights that pure tactical analysis couldn't match. She could sense the determination radiating from each captain, but also their underlying fears and doubts about the mission's chances of success. "We're not just fighting for those prisoners," she told Marcus privately as they reviewed the final assault plans. "We're fighting for the idea that resistance is possible. Every species in the galaxy has been told that the empires are too powerful to challenge, that slavery and conquest are simply facts of life." Marcus nodded, understanding the deeper implications of their mission. The Underground Railroad had started as a collection of individual vessels rescuing small groups of slaves, but it was evolving into something more significant, a demonstration that organized resistance could challenge even the most powerful oppressors. The assault began, with Kai coordinating a massive cyber attack on the Kraltech communication networks throughout the sector. While their main target was the defensive systems of the processing facility, the broader operation served to blind and confuse Empire forces across multiple star systems. Sarah led a team of human engineers in deploying gravity mines around the orbital defense platforms, turning the Kraltech's own defensive positions into liabilities. The human approach to warfare emphasized mobility and creative thinking over brute force, allowing smaller forces to neutralize much larger defensive installations. The actual ground assault was spearheaded by Captain Martinez of the Freedom's Edge, a former Earth Defense Force Marine, who had brought weapons and equipment specifically designed for storming fortified positions. His team moved through the facility's defensive perimeter with the fluid precision of water, flowing around obstacles. Zara waited aboard the Aurora's Dawn as the assault teams penetrated the processing facility, her medical bay prepared to receive wounded from both sides of the conflict. Her empathic abilities allowed her to monitor the emotional state of the rescue operation in real time, providing Marcus with valuable intelligence about the progress of different teams. "The prisoners are in sections 7 through 12, she reported as her abilities detected the massive concentration of fear and desperation that characterized captive populations. "But Marcus, I'm sensing something else. There are beings in the lower levels whose emotional signatures are different. They're not prisoners. They're something else entirely. The discovery of the Empire's research laboratories beneath the processing," facility revealed the full scope of Kralthek operations on Tartarus III. They weren't just processing slaves for sale. They were conducting experiments on captured beings, trying to understand the biological and psychological factors that made different species suitable for various types of forced labor. The revelation added a new dimension of urgency to the rescue operation. These weren't just prisoners waiting to be sold. They were victims of horrific medical experimentation that violated every principle of civilized behavior recognized throughout the galaxy. Marcus led the team that penetrated the research levels, his human sensibilities recoiling at the clinical brutality they discovered. The Kralthek scientists had been studying the most effective methods for breaking the will of different species, documenting their findings with the detached precision of academic research. "Get everyone out," Marcus ordered as his team began releasing prisoners from the experimental chambers. "Every living being in this place comes with us, regardless of their condition." The evacuation of nearly 1,500 beings from the processing facility required every ship in the human fleet working at maximum capacity. Many of the rescued prisoners required immediate medical attention that stretched the capabilities of even their expanded medical teams. Zara worked without rest for 3 straight days, using her empathic healing abilities to treat both physical wounds and psychological trauma. The combination of human medical technology and Lyrosian healing methods proved essential for helping the victims of the Empire's experiments begin to recover as the human fleet departed from the ruins of the Tartarus III facility, leaving behind a smoking reminder that the Kralthek Empire's operations were not beyond challenge. Zara realized that their mission had accomplished something even more significant than the rescue of 1,500 prisoners. They had demonstrated that coordinated resistance was possible, that the galaxy's oppressors were not invincible, and that the principles of freedom and dignity could triumph over even the most overwhelming odds. The Underground Railroad had evolved from a collection of individual heroes into a genuine force for liberation that would inspire others throughout the galaxy to take up the fight against injustice. 2 years after the destruction of the Tartarus III facility, the galaxy had changed in ways that few could have predicted. The Underground Railroad had evolved from a small network of human rescue ships into a multi-species coalition that challenged the fundamental assumptions about power and resistance that had governed galactic civilization for millennia. Zara stood on the observation deck of New Haven, a massive space station that served as the headquarters for what the galactic media had begun calling the Liberation Front. The structure was built from salvaged materials and volunteer labor, representing a new model of cooperation that transcended traditional species boundaries. The station bustled with activity as beings from dozens of different worlds worked together on rescue missions, intelligence gathering, and the complex logistics of relocating thousands of freed slaves to safe worlds throughout the galaxy. Former prisoners had become rescue specialists, their personal experience with slavery making them invaluable assets in understanding the Empire's operations. Marcus Chen had been promoted from ship captain to fleet coordinator, overseeing rescue operations across multiple sectors. The former cargo pilot now commanded a force of over 300 vessels, most of them donated or captured from slaver organizations that had learned to fear the sight of human ships. The latest intelligence reports show Kralthek slave operations have decreased by 60% in this sector alone, Kai announced during their daily briefing. The young hacker had become the Liberation Front's chief information warfare specialist. His electronic attacks on Empire communication networks legendary among the underground resistance. Sarah Rodriguez, now chief engineer for the entire operation, had been instrumental in developing the new class of rescue vessels that combined human technology with innovations from multiple species. The ships were faster, more heavily armed, and better equipped for medical support than anything the original Underground Railroad had possessed. But the most significant changes were not technological or organizational. They were philosophical. The success of the human-led resistance had inspired other species to challenge the empires and criminal organizations that had oppressed them for generations. Uprisings were occurring on dozens of worlds, all following the human model of refusing to accept injustice as inevitable. Zara had become more than just the Liberation Front's chief medical officer. Her combination of empathic healing abilities and deep understanding of trauma had made her the primary specialist in helping former slaves rebuild their lives. More importantly, Her transformation from helpless prisoner to active resistance fighter served as inspiration for countless others. The Altarian Colonial government has officially recognized our operations and offered to provide safe haven for any beings we rescue from their region, Marcus reported with satisfaction. That makes 7 independent governments that have formally endorsed our activities. The political implications were staggering. For the first time in galactic history, legitimate governments were officially supporting resistance activities against the established empires. The Kralthek, Vorthan, and other major powers found themselves facing not just military opposition, but diplomatic isolation as their practices became unacceptable to an increasing number of civilized worlds. Zara reviewed the medical reports from their latest rescue operation, a joint mission with Canarian resistance fighters that had liberated over 2,000 beings from a processing ship in the Outer Rim. The cooperation between different species was becoming more sophisticated with each operation as they learned to combine their unique abilities and perspectives. There's something else we need to discuss, Marcus said, his expression growing serious as he addressed the senior staff. Imperial intelligence reports indicate that the Kralthek are planning a major retaliation. They're assembling a fleet specifically designed to hunt down Liberation Front assets. The news wasn't unexpected. The Empire's losses had become too significant to ignore, and their leadership faced pressure to demonstrate that challenging their authority carried severe consequences. The Underground Railroad's success had inspired too many others to resist for the Kralthek to allow it to continue unchallenged. What kind of force are we looking at? Sarah asked, her engineer's mind already calculating defensive requirements and tactical options. Kai's fingers danced across his console as he pulled up the latest intelligence data. Preliminary estimates suggest a battle fleet of at least 50 heavy cruisers, plus support vessels and ground assault troops. They're calling it the Pacification Fleet, and their stated objective is the complete elimination of all human resistance activities. The scope of the Imperial response was both a tribute to their success and a sobering reminder of the dangers they faced. The Liberation Front had grown powerful, but they were still vastly outnumbered by the combined forces of the galactic empires. Zara felt the familiar weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders as she considered the implications. Thousands of former slaves now living free lives would become targets if the pacification fleet succeeded. The refugee colonies, the safe houses, the entire network of support systems they had built over 2 years of operations would be systematically destroyed. We can't fight them directly, Marcus acknowledged, his tactical experience recognizing the impossibility of matching Imperial firepower with their lighter, more mobile vessels. But we don't have to fight them the way they expect us to. The strategy that emerged from their planning sessions was typically human in its approach. Instead of meeting the enemy's strength head-on, they would use the Empire's own advantages against them. The pacification fleet's size and coordination requirements would make it vulnerable to the kind of asymmetric warfare that had proven so effective in their rescue operations. The battle began not with ship-to-ship combat, but with Kai's most ambitious cyber warfare operation to date. Instead of targeting individual vessels, his team launched coordinated attacks on the Empire's communication networks, supply lines, and command structures across multiple star systems simultaneously. Information warfare has always been our strongest weapon, Kai explained as his fingers worked to maintain their electronic assault. The Empire depends on rigid command hierarchies and centralized control. Disrupt their communications, and their numerical advantage becomes a liability. Sarah's engineering teams deployed gravity mines and sensor scramblers throughout the likely approach routes to New Haven Station, turning the surrounding space into a maze of hidden dangers and false readings. The Imperial fleet would find itself fighting shadows and phantom signals rather than clearly identified targets. But the most important aspect of their defense wasn't technological or tactical. It was moral. News of the impending Imperial assault had spread throughout the galaxy, and the response was unprecedented. Independent governments offered sanctuary for Liberation Front personnel and refugees. Resistance cells on dozens of worlds launched diversionary attacks to draw Imperial forces away from the main fleet. Zara coordinated the evacuation of non-combatants from New Haven Station, using her empathic abilities to calm the fears of those who would have to leave their new home behind. But many refused to go, choosing to stay and fight alongside the humans who had given them their freedom. "We're not running anymore," declared Kayla, the Canarian woman who had been one of the first prisoners rescued by the Aurora's dawn. She now commanded her own rescue vessel and had personally freed hundreds of slaves from Imperial facilities. "This is our home, and we'll defend it." The sentiment was echoed by former slaves from dozens of species, all united by their shared experience of liberation and their determination to protect the future that the Liberation Front represented. The battle for New Haven would be fought not just by humans, but by all those who believed in the possibility of freedom. When the Imperial Pacification Fleet finally arrived, they found themselves facing an enemy they didn't understand and couldn't effectively counter. Instead of the concentrated resistance they expected, they encountered a fluid, adaptive defense that seemed to anticipate their every move and turn their strengths into weaknesses. The battle lasted 3 days, with neither side able to claim decisive victory. But when the Imperial fleet finally withdrew to regroup and reconsider their strategy, the Liberation Front remained intact and operational. More importantly, their successful defense had been broadcast across the galaxy, inspiring new resistance movements on worlds that had never before dared to challenge Imperial authority. Zara stood once again on the observation deck of New Haven Station, watching the stars wheel slowly past as repair crews worked to fix the damage from the recent battle. The young Lyrosian woman who had once cried in despair aboard a Kraltek slave ship was now a leader in the galaxy's fight for freedom. Her life transformed in ways she never could have imagined. Marcus joined her at the viewport, his expression thoughtful as he considered the implications of their victory. "The Empire will be back," he said quietly. "This is far from over." "No," Zara agreed, her violet eyes reflecting the starlight. "But something fundamental has changed in the galaxy. People now know that resistance is possible, that empires can be challenged, and that freedom is worth fighting for. Whatever happens next, that no